What's up? How's it going, everyone? For those that didn't catch the news today, Pokemon Showdown players received a huge bombshell, with Dracovish officially being banned from the overused tier. Now, I've actually made 2 videos on the topic already of why Dracovish is so powerful, and more importantly, talked about why it was unhealthy because of how much it restricted your team building down to its very few counters. Despite those videos, I actually never weighed in on if it deserved a ban because, even right now after the fact, I was never sure if it quite deserved a ban to be exact. I'm actually still pretty on the fence about it. But in the wake of this ban, the first thing that a lot of people said is, well, there goes Seismitoad, or later Seismitoad, see an underused, yada yada. This is of course because of the very few counters to Dracovish that existed. Seismitoad was probably the most prominent. Its great bulk and access to the ability Water Absorb meant that enemy Dracovishes had to be careful about throwing around Vicious Wrens willy-nilly, and it could even come in on Dracovish's alternative attacks and get up Stealth Rocks for free. And actually, that mention of Stealth Rocks is the main focus for today's video. I don't want to do this like a big edited one in the past, another sort of discussion video, because I just want to kind of rap about this for a bit and talk about it, because generally speaking, Seismitoad was the most prominent Stealth Rocker in the overused tier. This was recently backed up by this month's usage stats, where Seismitoad saw less usage on the latter than Ferrothorn, another prominent rocker, but Ferrothorn sets only contain Stealth Rock 50% of the time, whereas Seismitoad's had it like 75% of the time, which even that seems low to me. I mean, it's really not hard to see why. For many teams, you pretty much had to run Seismitoad as an obligatory Dracovish counter. And if you're gonna have this thing on your team, you might as well get the most out of it and take advantage of its great Stealth Rock setting abilities. Hell, even in games without a Dracovish, it was still a very competent rocker in its own right. Its typing and its bulk meant that it got a lot of chances to swap in. And even if its uninvested attacking stats didn't exactly scare your opponent, not many wanted to risk staying in and eating a Scald Burn or a knockoff or a Toxic. So it got a lot of opportunities to get up rocks for free. But again, Dracovish is gone, and the pressing need for Seismitoad is gone too as a result. And the loss of those two, both top 10 in usage stats last month, are going to have a ton of effects on the metagame. Things like Keldeo all of a sudden becomes a lot better because it loses a huge counter in Seismitoad. Or other Scarfers that were slower than Dracovish are now going to become much more prominent. Fable maybe needs Wish Teleport a little bit less now. Maybe it'll start running Stealth Rocks of its own. It doesn't need to Wish Teleport those wishes to Seismitoad all the time because that's a huge part of how those balance teams worked. Lots of little things are going to be changing. For me, the most interesting ripple effects this ban has, you can probably already guess where I'm going towards here if you saw the title, but it's going to be that there's this massive hole in the meta for a premier Stealth Rocker in the tier. And with Seismitoad gone, who's going to take this place? The most obvious candidates are already rather prominent in the tier. Hippowdon is pretty much already a better version of Seismitoad, but it just lacks a water typing and water absorb, which are of course much less important with Dracovish gone. But it does have crazy good defensive stats, phasing, recovery, and sand to either chip its opponents in stall or slower based games, or set up a Sand Rush Extra Drill. This guy really suffered from Dracovish more than most, so it's absolutely a likely candidate to take that spot from Seismitoad at the moment. When it comes to other big stealth rockers, another biggie even before this ban is Komodo. This thing is versatile as hell with access to Taunt, Toxic. It's got great move coverage between Dragon Claw, Body Press, Earthquake. It can even run Iron Defense to turn it from like a rocking pivot into a bit of a latent sweeper for the endgame. However, that 4x weakness to Fairy does concern me a little, but again, huge candidate right there. As I mentioned earlier, you can make the case that Ferrothorn is already the most prominent stealth rocker since it has higher usage stats than Seismitoad, even with Dracovish being in the meta. But I think those stats were also inflated with it being a Dracovish counter in its own right. And more importantly, the reason why only 50% of Ferrothorns were running Stealth Rocks is, in my opinion, because it also has access to Spikes, which is much more rare than Stealth Rocks in terms of move distribution, and like still really good. If you can shut down your opponent's hazard removal and get up a few Spikes and Stealth Rocks with another rocker, that's an incredible advantage. So yeah, I can definitely see these running Stealth Rocks more often, but personally speaking for myself, I love it more as a rocker in a Skarmory absent meta. You can also run both, but I find that's a lot for one thing to handle because usually you only have a turn or two to get these things up. So if you give it double duty like that, I'm not sure if it'll be quite as successful, but that's also a very likely option. Of course, I could also see some defensive stalwarts from the underused tier rising in usage as big rockers. Pokemon like Bronzong, Copperajah, and Corsola Galar come to mind from underused. In fact, speaking of underused, Cobalion has quickly risen to become one of the best Pokemon in that tier because it makes for such a good rocker and a pivot. But All but one of those that I just mentioned have a really rough time versus Excadrill, and Excadrill is like the big spinner in that tier, so I don't see those as super likely either. And then Clefable, of course, is still easily the queen of overuse, as the usage stats recently proved once again. It's been a famously good stealth rocker in previous generations, and I think it's a great set still in combination with another utility move like a Thunder Wave or an Aromatherapy, what have you. But whether Clefable will become a big rocker is a really tough one to predict, because on the one hand, part of me wants to say that Wish Teleport is still really good and we'll continue to see high usage, which I think it definitely will to some extent. But another part says, hey, Seismitoad is gone, and a lot of classic balanced cores are going to be disrupted as a result. So before, if I wanted to run a generic offense team with 4 offensive Pokemon and a defensive backbone of like Clefable and Corviknight, I couldn't really, because I needed something for Dracovish, or else my Pokemon would just get sacked and smoked right away. But now that isn't the case, and 2 Pokemon can feasibly work as a defensive backbone in teams like this, much better than they could in the past. So I wouldn't be surprised if Clefable got used as a rocker in teams like I just described in the future. Again, it is wildly difficult to predict where the meta might grow from here, and whether what I just described is a likely scenario at all. Maybe balance can kind of reign supreme for this foreseeable future until the DLC comes. This is so hard to predict, but if it does happen, you heard it here first. I wouldn't just be surprised if this ban opened the doors for a lot of great offense teams to thrive. There's of course some other prominent rockers from the overuse tier that come to mind, like Jirachi, Tyranitar, Mew, Shuckle, etc. But with what I just said about Clefable kind of opening the door for some offensive teams to work out a little bit more, I want to go into that topic a little bit more and bring up the topic of more offensive rock setters. Okay, so how do I go about this? Well, I guess I'll just say, like, it's pretty strange to me that most of the big stealth rock users this generation are these defensive tanky Pokemon, because it feels like the role of offensive rock setters has really kind of lost its way, or at least lost its prominence. For those that don't know what I'm talking about, so sure, there's defensive Pokemon like Seismitoad that can come in safely on a bunch of hits, get up rocks without much fear. But if you look at previous generations, especially Gen 7 comes to mind, Gen 5 I guess, where you had some crazy heavy hitters like Landorus, Garchomp, Mega Diancie. These Pokemon often operated very differently as rockers in their own right. They would swap in on these terrifying attackers, force these Pokemon out, and then set up Stealth Rocks on the switch. And look, like, scaring Pokemon out to use Stealth Rocks is like, of course, it's so basic and instrumental to like the very concept of Stealth Rocks, I guess. If you know what I'm talking about, you're probably rolling your eyes at how obvious it is. And even then, you still see it with these tanky Pokemon I've kind of dismissed, like Seismitoad. Like, if a Seismitoad is in versus an Excadrill, it might not be as scary as a Garchomp, but that Excadrill is still probably going to swap out anyways to avoid eating a Scald or a Scald Burn, what have you. But my point is, it's just not the same, you know? Personally, my hope with Seismitoad fading in the spotlight of the meta, and hopefully some more offensive teams replacing all this balance, is that we might see the return of these offensive rockers I'm describing. Just because a lot of the archetype was lost in the Dexit doesn't mean that the role can't be filled anymore. Personally, I'm hoping to see more offensive Stealth Rock sets become more common on things like your Mamoswine, Terrakion, maybe even Rhyperior. You know what I mean? Maybe it's a pipe dream after the Dexit, but I think it would be cool to see the role of Stealth Rockers become a little bit less passive going forward. It might not happen, but it'd be interesting to see. Although, of course, the whole discussion is probably not going to be that significant anyways, with a large amount of these aforementioned Pokemon returning in the DLC very soon. But before I sign off, I do want to mention that despite all this talk about Seismitoad being gone, who's going to take its place, blah, 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 I'm not so certain it's going to be gone for good. As of recording, there's only one water attacking type in the tier, Primarina. Seismitoad was so universal in the tier that I think it scared out a lot of the water attackers like Crawdon, Keldeo, and depending on how you classify it, Rotom Wash. But personally, once again, it's very early, but I predict that we see an initial huge downtick in the Seismitoad usage. And then these water attackers will see increased usage. And then, you know, when that happens, maybe we start to see Toad a little bit more. And then, you know, you get what I'm saying. With or without Dracovish, though, it's still a good Pokemon. Just because it isn't essential anymore doesn't mean we've seen the last of it. So yeah, all this is to say that I'm going to be watching its trajectory with great interest. If it does happen to drop out of overuse, I will admit I don't think it'll last much longer in the UU either. It might see some usage as a counter to the Rotom Wash and Keldeo I mentioned earlier, also Barbicle, I guess. But as I said, I'd be surprised if some of those that I just mentioned will remain underused for that long. And otherwise, there's like a lot of also really good tanky rockers who do the same thing as Seismitoad, but a little bit better. So maybe it ends up in RU once all is said and done. Maybe it still remains an OU, like I said. It's really hard to predict, but I think it's cool to watch. But all this talking from me, all this rambling, and I still haven't answered the primary question in this video, which is who is taking Seismitoad's spot in the meta as the primary rocker. I've talked about a lot of different ones that are already in the tier, some more offensive ones, maybe some underused ones. All this is to say, though, that I don't think there will be one. I don't think there is going to be a replacement for Seismitoad. And that's okay. Pokemon isn't meant to have a one Pokemon that does this role perfectly. It shouldn't be Clefable is your special wall, Corviknight's your physical wall, Seismitoad's your rocker. That's not healthy. You want to see variation. You want to see different Pokemon tackling this in different ways, having different advantages that you synergize with your team in unique ways. That's the fun of the game right there. So personally, I'm excited for Seismitoad. If maybe not getting completely booted at the door, I am excited for it to see a downtick in usage because it just opens the door for so many new possibilities of rocking. Rocking is not going anywhere. We all know that. You've seen my video. It's completely essential. But the idea of rocking and who can set it is extremely versatile, and I'm thankful that Game Freak gave it access to so many unique Pokemon, because now we can see a huge variation in the tier going forward, at least as we have in previous generations. So I don't know is the answer, and I hope there is no answer. But hey, look at me, I'm rambling. I've gotten way too into it there. I hope I didn't get too into the sticks with it there, but I just find it all very exciting and interesting. People have claimed that Overused is too stale for so long now, but I think we're in for a really interesting month of this meta, post Dracovish ban and pre-DLC release. For those who are part of my Discord, you've probably already gotten tired of me ranting all morning and maybe have carried it a bit too far here, but I think I'll stop here as a result. I hope you enjoyed the video though. If so, likes and subscriptions are still amazing and still super appreciated. I've got a new National Dex laddering video that I recorded today that you can expect to go up tomorrow afternoon, so stay tuned for that one. But once again, thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.